Coming to you from the Deep South, this is the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast. High-impact leadership is not reserved for leaders, and it has nothing to do with your position, title, or rank. However, it does have everything to do with your character. It's time to climb to the next level and beyond, personally and professionally. Now, let's start making it happen with your host, Mack Story.
Hello, and thanks for listening to the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast today. So last episode, if you didn't listen to it, you really need to listen to it for this episode to make sense, because this is part 2. And it's going to be a 3-part little mini series here. So there's another part to come after this one. But for this one and the next one to make sense, you need to go back and listen to the previous episode and then catch up. So I ain't going to rehash that episode. I'm assuming you listened to it. So I'm going to dive in where I left off. But I will say, last episode I was talking about some issues with my son Eric when he was turned 15, how I got it wrong. And now we made it up to now he's turning 16. So a year later, basically, from what I was sharing in the last episode. So a year later, when Eric turned 16 and actually received his driver's license, my mom chose to give him her car she had bought new and had for I don't remember how many years, but she gave him her car and got herself a new car. And we had planned a vacation to Panama City Beach, Florida. Rhea and I had at about the same time. And what we did was try to be nice to Eric. We invited Eric and one of his buddies to go with us. And you know, the thing I had did before with taking his truck away that I had bought him and trading it in, getting my Z06 Corvette, we hadn't had a good relationship since then. It was basically non-existent, a meaningful relationship. We still had one, but it didn't mean anything. I say we didn't have one, not the kind that we should have had. So, but he accepted because we were going to allow him to experience more freedom and responsibility by letting him follow us in his car on the way down. So he was going to get to leave from Auburn, Alabama, and go down to Panama City Beach, Florida, and basically follow us with his buddy in the car. It would be his first road trip behind the wheel of his own car. So he was excited. I can imagine, you know, if that was me back when I turned 16, getting to take that trip right off the bat would have been pretty cool. So trying to do a cool thing and try to work on rebuilding the relationship, even though it pretty much was non-existent. But it was a big win in that for Eric, so he was happy to do it, and wasn't really going to cost him anything. So Eric had his newfound freedom thanks to my mom's generosity, and Rhea and I gave him permission to drive his car with, this is the key part, with the understanding that he would not be driving it at night when all the partying and nothing but drunkenness was happening along the famous Panama City Beach Strip. If you're familiar with that, especially if you went down there as a young person, whether you were in high school or college, or maybe even a few years after that, you know what I'm talking about. And it's different today than it was back when I was young, but when I was young, that was the place to go, and it was a whole lot of fun, the wrong kind of fun. That I didn't want Eric involved in none of that, especially with his friend, him being responsible, new driver, all that stuff. Even if he wasn't drinking and he was behaving, I didn't want him to be out there. So the deal was, when the sun went down, he would park in the car until the sun came back up. So we had an uneventful trip on the drive down and settled into our condo. So Eric and his friend, They were off cruising the strip with plenty of daylight remaining that day when we got there. It was only like 3 hours, 3.5 hour drive, and we probably stopped to eat. So we were probably down there and checked in early as we could, probably 3 o'clock or whatever. And him and his buddy they were out there living it up as young teenagers. And so they were out cruising. Everything went great during our trip. I don't remember how many days we stayed. We stayed multiple days. But everything went great until the last night of the trip. And so Eric and his buddy decided sneak the car out and go driving along the Panama City Beach, the Strip. Basically, just cars. If you're not familiar with it, it's a mile or so long. Basically, all kind of stores and condos and hotels and restaurants and bars and all kind of stuff. And it's basically a mile or so long, maybe even longer than that. And people just go down there and drive. They'll drive down one side of the road till they get to the end of the traffic, which is a long way. And then they'll turn around and drive back the other way. And they just make loops round and around. People blasting their stereos, hanging out of cars, back of trucks filled up, people partying like crazy, all kind of stuff. But kind of wild. Kind of like Mardi Gras down there, but a little bit different. But anyway, they took the car out, broke our agreement. And unfortunately for him, we found out about it the next morning. And I decided, just like before, being very reactive, I decided to take away his driving privilege for the next 3 months. That was my plan. No thought, no nothing, just pure reaction based on feelings. After all the stuff I told you about last episode, a year later now, trying to give him another chance, and this is what he does with it. So I told him I didn't care if he walked to school, rode the school bus. He'd made another poor choice. He chose his actions, and he got to live with his consequences. And once again, I had no patience or no empathy. I went straight to what I knew and who I was. Overreacting instantly and then sticking to it. That's who I used to be. I'm much better now. I still got a lot of room to improve, but I'm so far away from where I used to be. It's ridiculous. And the story I'm telling you now, Eric was 16. He's about to be 35 now, and I was able to rebuild this relationship with him when he was 19. So I told you last episode about when he was 15. I'm talking about now when he was 16, and then it's basically stayed pretty much no relationship, not any. I mean, no meaningful relationship. Basically, from when he was 15 to 19. But when he was 17 is when I discovered the kind of content I'm talking to you about now. 2 years into us not having a relationship, and then 2 more years passed when he was 17, 17 to 19, when I started working on me. And I wasn't doing it to fix that relationship. I had no idea it would fix that relationship, but it did. But that's a different talk. Done had some of those talks with you, I know, in some other episodes, but in case you're a new listener, I wanted to catch you up to speed a little bit on that. Not too deep, but a little bit. So when we got home from that trip, he refused to stay with us and called his mom to come pick him up. He was supposed to be with us, but he was mad. I was mad. I didn't care if he left, and actually kind of glad he left, because back in them days, I was frustrated with him, and it's better for him to leave and have to be around me. And I knew that part. I knew that much. But his mom didn't agree with me taking away his driving privileges for those 3 months. And he also decided to start living with her full time instead of each of us, every other week. Basically, we had 50% rights. Eric would stay with me a week, stay with her a week, back and forth. But he decided he wanted to stay with her now. He's 16. He knows how to resist. He had the option. She was okay with it. I was okay with it because I was frustrated with him, and that's what he wanted to do. And we didn't have a relationship anyway, so it didn't even matter. And again, I was responding reactively based on feelings, all that same stuff. All the stuff I got so much wrong back those days, it's ridiculous. Hopefully me sharing it with you may help you, or maybe you'll share this with someone who might need to hear it, and they might get some results out of it, or maybe you'll get the book, Defining Influence. I didn't say that, but this is part 2 of a 3-part series from actually chapter 6. And I'm not reading the book to you. Some of it I am, but most of it I'm not. I'm adding a whole lot to it in between the lines. So as a result, I made him give his car back to my mom. And since I decided on the spot he wouldn't be driving it at all in the future, When we left Florida, it was going to be 3 months, no driving privilege. But then he got home, said he wanted to go live with his mom, didn't want to stay with us. So I did what I was good at. I overreacted some more. So then I called mom, told her I was bringing the car to her, and he wasn't getting the car. And then that's what happened. I should have been thinking to myself and considering the consequences of my actions. But again, I ain't ever heard all this stuff I'm talking to you about. I was kind of on autopilot, whatever that was, based off of natural growth, which was almost no growth, following people, following examples who also didn't know anything about all this stuff, talking to other people who were like me, who ain't never heard of this stuff, and they just agreed with me, and it's just a bad place to be, but that's where I was at. And I know today a lot of people are still in that same spot. A lot of them don't know much about what I'm talking about. They talk to people who don't know what I'm talking about. They get their advice from people that don't know this stuff I'm talking about, and they remain stuck. So at least if you're listening, I don't know what level you may be at in your life, but if you're at least listening, you're being exposed to some stuff I didn't get exposed to until I was 39 years old. Changed my life. I'm better now. But I should have been thinking about the consequences of my actions back then. But I wasn't being super reactive as I was most every day back then about something. It wasn't always about Eric. It didn't matter what it was. That's who I was, a highly reactive person. And remember, I didn't hear Covey's words about stimulus and response that I shared last time and start my personal leadership journey until 2008. And the story I'm talking to you about in this episode was in 2007. So nearly 2 years after that incident, the first one, I was a long way from starting to work on me. And I was struggling as a parent. But I thought Eric was the problem. You may be listening to this now and think, well, that ain't that bad what you did. I did the same thing. If you would have, you got the same problem I got, or I had. I ain't got that problem anymore, but I had it. But a whole lot of people would think what I did was not really extreme. It wasn't if you're responding based on feelings. I didn't go punch him in the mouth. That's worse. I didn't do those sort of things. But there's a scale where you can be at, and I was nowhere near the end of the scale I needed to be on. I was close to the wrong end. But I thought Eric was the problem. But guess who raised Eric? Guess who had been a poor example his whole life? See what I'm talking about? That problem was me. But if I want to blame him, then it's all him. But what I know now is I look in the mirror and it was all me. So knowing and understanding what I know now, I was reacting based on the feelings and values I had at the time. Not what I have now, but what I had at the time. However, my values were not in alignment with natural laws and principles. I talked to you about that last episode. I valued control. And when I didn't have it, it made me mad. Or at least I thought it made me mad. In any situation between stimulus and response, I have the freedom to choose my response. Which means if I'm mad, it's because I choose to be mad. And someone who can't understand that, they blaming others for why they're mad. We have the freedom to choose in any situation. That means whatever we are and whoever we're being, we're choosing to be that. And anybody that doesn't understand that, they got a lot of growing to do. Anybody who says so-and-so made me so mad, they got a lot of growing to do. Ain't nobody made anybody mad except the person who's mad. The stimulus, back in those days, Eric broke our agreement, talking about stimulus and response. He broke our agreement. That was the stimulus, and took the car out that night. My response was I blew up. I overreacted. I blamed him. I tried to control him, act like I owned him. And ultimately, I made him give his car back to my mom. So that was a stimulus and response in that situation. All of the related thoughts based on my feelings about the situation took me about a second or less to process. Instant. There was no pause in between stimulus and response for me at that time in my life. Never happened. Instant decision making based on feelings. I was an expert at reacting and had no desire to think about my response. My responses came quickly and naturally without any intentional thought. That's who I was and how I operated. Why I say I'm way, way better. I'm a long way from that today, but I've also still got a long way to go. I mean, the worst thing I do now mostly is just be quiet. And I might be quiet for a day or two or three over something. But I don't do this crazy stuff I'm talking about now in the book. But it's still a good lesson. There's a lot of people still doing it. And they're getting the consequences in their life of doing it. And it may be just like I was and don't know if I can't do that, what am I supposed to do? You got to grow and develop yourself, figure it out. You got to learn all these principles, learn how to use them, how to combine them, how to apply them, all that stuff. Same stuff I had to do and anybody else who's had to do it. You got to do the work on you. And yes, you still have all these problems going on. It's kind of like you got to it's like you're a battleship headed across the ocean and you got to rebuild yourself while you're underway. You don't get to go back to port and put it in dock and dry dock and rebuild it. You got to do it because the world is going on and you're in the middle of it. That's why it's hard. A lot of people won't do it. But I've grown tremendously since those days. Now I can see much more clearly. Nothing made me mad back in those days. Eric didn't make me mad. His choices didn't make me mad. I chose to be mad about what he was doing. I chose it all. I chose to get mad and blow up. I take full responsibility for that. I did it. I could have chosen to stay calm. I've done that in other situations before. I do it all the time now. If I can do it now, I could have done it then, but I didn't understand it. Didn't have my values aligned. Didn't want to do it. I chose to blame. I could have chosen to take responsibility for my lack of leadership. Development, meaning I hadn't developed myself as a leader. I chose to control. You don't need any development when you want to lead with control. You just need to be able to take control. There are lots of ways you can do that. I could have chosen to influence. I chose to treat him like an object. I could have chosen to treat him like a person. And if you don't really understand the difference in all this stuff I'm saying, that ain't the lesson I'm teaching you today. But that should be a sign for you. I ain't tracking with Mack. I don't know what's he talking about treating somebody like an object or a person. You got to grow and develop yourself. Or go listen to some of my other episodes. I talk about that in a lot of them. I've spoken about it. But you start growing and developing yourself. You come across this content, you start to understand what it means. When we see someone as an object, I'll just tell you this: we blame them. When we see them as a person, we try to help them. That's just one little tip. There's a whole lot more than that goes with it. But between stimulus and response, I always can and do choose my response. I am responsible. I am response able, which means I'm responsible. Until you can say that right there, you got a long way to go on even understanding this principle of being proactive. Again, I'm going to say that I always can and I always do choose my response. I'm responsible. Whether I'm happy, I'm mad, I'm sad, whatever. The way I'm thinking, the things I'm doing, my choices determine my behavior. Not somebody else's, mine. I made many poor choices. I always let my feelings get in the way back in those days. The 2006 incident with Eric's truck was the beginning of our 4 years with very little, if any, influence with Eric. I didn't have almost no influence with him during those years. Some of the most important years of his life, I didn't have influence with him. That's where my stupid choices, that's what I'm going to call them. You call yours what you want to. But for me, they were stupid. They were dumb. They were made out of ignorance because I had no idea what kind of idiot I was, especially as a parent. But there really wasn't a relationship for all those years, from 15 to 19. That's where my ignorance had led me. But Eric realized he no longer had to be around his reactive father. He didn't want to be around me anymore, and he figured out he didn't have to be. Therefore, he started making choices that didn't include me or being around me. Again, I had lost all influence with him. This was not my choice, but guess what? It was the consequence of my choices, the ones I'd made in the past at that time as a parent. So in a sense, I say it wasn't my choice, but it was my choice, right? I made all those choices. But I didn't choose for him not to be with me. But the choices I made, that was a natural consequence in that specific situation because he had options. Even if he couldn't stay with his mom, he could have ran away. By the time you're 16, you can do pretty much whatever you want. You just got to live with the consequences. Happens all the time. Teenagers run away. Some of them come back. Some of them never do. Some of them run into some bad folks, and then they find out about choices and consequences. It's just the way life works. When we make our choices, the related consequences automatically come with them. And you heard about a lot of consequences I got from the choices I made. But then I started making better choices, and that's when I was able to rebuild that relationship with him in 2019. He's been in my life ever since. And he worked with me for a couple of years after that. So I'm going to leave you with some things from the book in this chapter where I say stop and think. I got 4 of these. And it's really to help you reflect on what I've been talking about last episode and this episode, and even what's coming. So stop and think. If someone overreacts to a situation, are they building trust or creating distrust? It's obvious. They're creating distrust. Do they have more or less influence than they did before? If they're creating distrust, they're going to have less influence with you or me when somebody overreacts. It's a natural consequence. Stop and think about this one. If someone blames you, are they building trust or creating distrust? You already know they're creating distrust. So when they blame you, do they have more or less influence? You already know they're creating distrust. They're going to have less influence. And you got to be able to turn these questions around, because if you're doing these things to someone else, you're creating distrust. That's what looking in the mirror is. I'm asking you to look out the window so you can understand the impact. You can see it easy when you look at somebody else doing it. You can see this is the choice, this is the consequence. But when you look in the mirror, for some reason it's hard for people to see the same exact thing is the truth. If you overreact, you're creating distrust. If you blame someone, you're creating distrust. Either one of those things, your influence is going down, which means you're getting more and more miserable. Because less influence doesn't make you happy, it makes you miserable. You know why? Because you're going to choose to be miserable. Same way, miserable, mad, sad, it's a choice. But people haven't developed themselves. If they're blaming people like that, that means they hadn't developed themselves very well. If they're overreacting, means they haven't developed themselves very well. So they're going to run around and say somebody made them mad, somebody, made them whatever. Stop and think about this. If someone tries to control you, are they building trust or creating distrust? You already know the answer. They're creating distrust. You don't want to be controlled. Neither does anyone else. So do they have more or less influence when they're trying to control you? They're going to have less. Long term, in that moment, they may think they they got more influence, but it's artificial. It's not authentic. The moment you get away from it, you're going to run from it. So they're going to have less influence in the future for sure. Most likely, even in that moment. They may have to exercise more control because they instantly get less influence. So if you're trying to control someone else, guess what you're doing? Creating distrust. Guess what's happening in your influence? It's going down. So one more stop and think here at the end. And throughout the book, Defining Influence, I've got these stop and think questions throughout the book. And the purpose is to get the person who's reading the book to do exactly that. Stop and think about what these things do to your influence. That's why the book's called Defining Influence. Everything in it is to help you increase your influence, but also to help you see if you do the opposite, you're going to decrease your influence. Life's going to always be better with more influence, not less. So this last one is, stop and think. If someone treats you like an object instead of a person, are they building trust or creating distrust? You already know the answer. Everybody always knows the answer. Those people would be creating distrust if they treat you like an object instead of treating you like a person. Because of that, do they have more or less influence? Everybody also knows the answer. They're going to have less influence. Guess what happens when you treat someone like an object? Remember, that's when you're blaming people. That's a simple definition. There's a lot more to it than that. Instead of a person, when you're helping people. When you do it to others, you're going to create distrust and you're going to have less influence. All right? So that's part 2 of 3. I'm going to wrap this one up. And I'll be back next week with part 3 in this 3-part series. Hope you get some value out of it. Talk to you next time.
Make it happen or someone else will. It might as well be you. Are you serious about taking your career and your life to the next level and beyond? Check out Mack Story's Blue Collar Leadership Series books and others, now available on audio, along with paperback and ebooks at Amazon and Audible. Please visit bluecollarleadership.com to learn about Mack's books, programs, special offers, and more. Thank you for listening to the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast.